Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Down with D&D. My name is Shawn Merwin, and today our co-host is none other than Rich Lescouflair, best-selling D&D freelancer, graphic and layout designer, and lead writer on the 5th edition science fiction project, Esper Genesis. Rich, thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for having me on.
We were just talking about our quarantine life here, so we got that out of the way, our ranting and raving about the lunacy of the world and the people that live within it.
The scourge of the Rona.
That's right. Yes, it's exactly it. So, but we are here not to talk about those awful things, but we are here to talk about fun things like D&D and a little game called Esper Genesis and 5th edition in general. But before we get into all of that, I like to ask my co-hosts about their history with D&D and role-playing games. When did you start, and why do you keep playing?
Well, when I started, I must have told the story a couple times now. I was in junior high. I got into actually, we'll make the story really short. I got into a fight.
It's a good start.
And not, I didn't start it. No, anyway,
Okay.
No. Yeah, got into a fight, ended up basically sitting out at gym class, and, along with the other kid who became a very good friend of mine because he was sitting down and he was reading a whole bunch of books with swords and dragons and all that stuff. And I just kind of looked over and I'm like, "Hey man, what's that?" And he turned around, looked completely shocked, handed me the book, started explaining everything to me, came to my house later on, and then it was all systems go from there. I was in 7th grade. And I just went on with it from there. I've always been like a lover of books and writing stories. So both of those things just meshed completely together into D&D, and then branched off into other games. Mm-hmm. I love creating stories and, basically, seeing people enjoy whatever things I can put out, whatever I can create. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for me. So that's why I keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, I hear a lot of origin stories in gaming, and I think that's the first one that's ever started with a fist fight.
Yep. Hey,
that's pretty impressive.
It's a lot of combat in D&D, So
that's true. That's true. Yeah, I was going to ask you, are you more into the combat or the role playing? But apparently,
it started with combat.
That's true. I always start in media res, right?
Yep.
And always start with the action. Well, that definitely starts with the action. All right. So, when did you make the transition from just being, a player and a lover of the game into making it into a professional thing?
Well, I liked writing a lot of short stories. I had a hand in making several attempts to write for TSR back in the day. And after I had moved down to Florida, I pretty much just kept playing around with everything that I was doing. The 5th edition came out and I got back into D&D. I had put together like a concept adventure called Curse of the Demon Stone, which I had given to my friend Brian. I wrote out the whole thing and I laid it out in Word, to the best of my ability, so that it looked like a 5e book. And then when I just showed it to him, hey, take a look at this. And he looked at it and he said, "Well, who did this?" I looked at him and I said, "I did." In Word. And he just looked at me and said, "You did this in Word?" And I said, "Yeah." So he went and brought it to a few of his friends. Brian, by the way, is my business partner. He works with me at Alligator Alley Entertainment. And he was the secretary for Gamma for like 20 years. So He knew a lot of industry people, showed them the stuff, and they apparently told him, "Hey, you need to put this guy to work." So I met some other people through there, and going to Gamma Trade Show with him, I went and approached and talked to Mike Merles,
Mhm.
who asked me if I was interested in writing for D&D. I said sure, absolutely. It's kind of something I wanted to do for a long time, and not very much longer after that, I was writing with you.
Mhm. Oh, that's true. That's that gets me into the story pretty quickly.
Yep.
Because someone approached me and said there are two people I would like you to work with on an upcoming adventure. One was Mr. Rich Lescouflair. The other was Monica Valentinelli on an adventure called In Vola's Wake.
Yep.
And so I did, and that one is up on the DM's Guild now, and it was a free adventure during their remote giveaway recently. So yeah, that was a fun adventure to concept and write with you and Monica.
Yeah, definitely.
So was that your first quote unquote professional publication?
Publication, technically, yes. Honestly, my first professional job was doing maps for for like a third-party Pathfinder adventure.
Okay.
And then yeah, but as far as writing, yeah, that's my first like official publication outside of the Demon Stone adventure that I had told you about.
Mhm.
We decided to put that into like a little printout, and Brian had done the layout for it, and that was actually the first product from our publishing company, Alligator Alley Entertainment. It was around the same time.
Okay.
So
Nice. So your people always ask me, how do I get involved? How do I become published through Wizards of the Coast or other third-party professional publications? And every answer is different, right? Everyone's path is different. And so yours was sit down and do the thing and give it to someone who gives it to someone who gives it to someone who then gets you in the door in some way.
yeah, it's well, yes and no. To meet a lot of the industry people, yeah, I that was actually unintentional.
Right.
when I tried to Brian, it was very unintentional. But once I was actually into it, I think it was either Merles or Perkins. I think Perkins had said no. It was Merles, because I actually just approached him and asked him about it. So
Okay.
when I had sat down with him on another panel, like one of his panels, he basically said, "Hey, just to let you know, we're not unfriendly people. If you're really interested in doing something for us, just ask."
Mhm.
and
Okay.
that's kind of the way it worked out. It was really
Right.
cool.
But when you sat down and made that Demon Stone adventure, you didn't plan on it
No, not at all.
being like a submission to Wizards or something.
No.
It's just something you did because that's what you wanted to do.
Yes, absolutely. I just enjoyed doing it. So, and it turned into a thing. I never even thought about getting into doing layout at all. It's just, I don't know, something that just came to me, and then I decided to learn how to use InDesign, because doing layout in Word sucks.
But it's possible.
Yes.
It's possible to make good looking products because you see them on the DM's Guild. But
Yeah.
obviously, InDesign is a more professional. It gives you a greater range of what you can do.
Yes, absolutely.
And so your background is not in layout or art or graphic design or anything, right?
No, not at all. I'm more of a writer
Okay.
than anything else.
And yet, because of your passion for storytelling and making the best thing that you could make, you are now doing layout for a lot of the, say, Adventurers League content, correct?
Yes. Actually, that happened through, well, as you know, you were one of the first Dungeon Masters Guild Adepts.
Right.
And there were 10 of us, and for some reason, out of 10 of us, I was the only one that knew how to use InDesign.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of, benefited me in the sense that I did most of the layout work, which means I got most of the practice for all of our products, and until the point where I was asked to do layout for season 8 of D&D Adventurers League, and it just went on from there.
Right. And if you hadn't been willing / able to do layout for those Guild Adept products, who knows what would have happened, right? We were relying on you to be the gateway, for all these products to actually get out there and look professional. So that role cannot be underestimated in terms of its importance to the production process these days.
No, absolutely. And I actually believe that the stuff that we have put out under the Gilded Apps has actually raised the bar on the types of products that come out on the Dungeon Masters Guild. We've seen, after we started hammering out a lot of professional grade products, you started seeing a lot of other people doing collaborations, and they have their own editors and layout people, and a lot of the stuff looks amazing now.
Oh, it does. It looks absolutely top notch. The stuff that came out, say, during like the D20 craze of 3rd edition can't hold a candle
No,
to,
yeah,
to the
absolutely
stuff
not.
that's up on the DM's Guild right now, from a variety of people. So it's great. I'll see a new product go up and I'll be like, wow, that looks great. I wonder who did that. And it's a person I've never heard of, or a group of people I've never heard of before. They're just, people that love the game and love what they do, and it shows.
Yeah. Well, you're always going to get better results out of something you're truly passionate about.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's why when people come to me and say, how do I become a professional game designer, or get my work in front of wizards and stuff, and or other third-party publishers, and the answer is, you will do it because that's what you do. Right.
Yep.
There are 100,000 paths to it, but it has to start with loving what you do and just doing it because that's what you do.
Yes, and I believe both you and I do it full time now. So.
Pretty much. So let's talk about Esper Genesis then. So, 5th edition D&D came out. There was the open gaming license, which allowed you to use the 5e rule set to make whatever you wanted. And so why science fiction? Why Esper Genesis?
Aside from D&D, my second and third favorite RPGs were D6 Star Wars and Shadowrun. Mm-hmm. I was a very, very big sci-fi fan from when I was small up until now. So the obvious go-to idea was to take everything that I love about sci-fi and fit it into my favorite game. Mm-hmm. It's originally started out as let me make some sci-fi weapons and armor, for 5e.
Okay.
And I showed it to my friend Eric, who's now my other business partner at AE, mm-hmm. and he just kind of looked at it and said, "Cool. What are you going to do with this?" So, I don't know. So
what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, what am I going to do with this? So I was like, well, this needs more stuff. I added more stuff, and I said, I need a setting to put this in. Put that in the setting. The setting needed, alien races and, different species and creatures, and started putting all that in. And I'm like, this really needs an overall storyline. So dropped that in. It just grew. It mm-hmm. kind of blew up into another unexpected thing. And then I said, well, we're already kind of in the middle of doing this production thing with AE. And I got really excited about this, so we decided, hey, let's put it all together and do a Kickstarter to get an actual RPG out. No one had really done a science fiction version of 5e at the time, mm-hmm. So it just kind of leaned towards that. Well, since no one's actually officially done it yet, we can release it and see what happens.
Okay. So when was that Kickstarter?
It was in the beginning of 2017. Okay. We had, in 2016, we had put together most of the basics of the rule system. We released like a playtest adventure, had a whole bunch of people playtest it. I brought it to Metatopia, the Metatopia convention, where I had who did I have? I had Rob Donahue and Cam Banks, and like a lot of industry professionals take a look at it, and they gave me their input. Ken Haidt, and actually both Ken Haidt and Cam Banks kind of told me, well, this is D&D as far as the rules. What makes it so different?
Mhm.
And the answer was that it's sci-fi wasn't exactly good enough of an answer. So, you
Okay.
know, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the storyline and integrate it into the game and dial it up to 11 so
Cool.
that, you know, as soon as you make a character, you're totally enmeshed into into the story, into the galaxy.
Nice. For those who don't know, Metatopia is almost like a reverse convention. It's where you go as a game designer to play test your stuff with other industry insiders and creators and designers and media folk around role playing games. And I've never been since it's been that sort of convention, but I know a ton of people who have, and they say that it is, you know, one of the greatest experiences of their lives in terms of their game design careers.
Yeah, you can get a lot of assistance, advice, things that you would have never thought of from people that have already gone through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great convention to go to.
Yeah. So what is just in terms of Esper Genesis, we're going to talk about using 5e to create other games as our main topic, but just on the Esper Genesis track here, what products are currently out for Esper Genesis?
Okay, so primarily, as far as core books, we have the core manual, which is essentially your player's handbook.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that you need to make a character and to play a character, and all of the rules that all of the basic rules that you need as a game master to run the game.
Mm-hmm.
We recently came out with our threats database, which is, you know, your monster manual, in a sense. It does have a bunch of alien species and monsters from a whole bunch of different genres, you know, robots, and there are tables to create random sci-fi beasts. But that whole concept of dialing the story up to 11 took hold in there. So I also put in a chapter of all of these super organizational threats to the galaxy, these, like, you know, massive conspiracies and shadow organizations and how they're involved. So to give the game master ideas for campaign storylines that I might be using some of as well. Right now we're working on the Master Technician's Guide, which is, you would say it's a DM's guide, but it's not really. It is. It's more of a genre expansion and you know, a gear book, starships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are different types of. I don't want to give some things away.
Oh, sure. But it
expands
expands the not just the universe, but the rules as well.
But the rules as well. Yes,
Okay,
exactly
cool.
right. Those are the core books we have out. We have a set of adventures. We have, I think, 3 introductory mods out right now, and we have 8 Crucible Core adventures. Crucible Core is our organized play campaign.
Okay.
We have 8 of those out so far. We have a 9th one coming probably within the next few weeks.
Sweet. Okay, so before we move on to our main topic, is there anything else, you know, in terms of just your experiences that you want to talk about that our listeners might be interested in hearing?
That they might be interested. I don't know.
Well, you know, I just don't want to forget anything that you might have done that you know speaks to your experiences.
Well, we have a bunch of things that are planned. You know what it is? It's just like you have all this stuff planned for the future, and you can't say anything about it.
Oh,
so it's
sure.
like, I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm like, no, I can't really say anything about that either.
Right.
I can say that I have very much enjoyed balancing the whole Esper Genesis project and being a guild adept at the same time. It is a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's been you know, something that I never thought I would be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat you are, right? 3 years ago, I wouldn't have said, well, I'm going to, you know, quit my full-time job or have it sold out from beneath me in my case, but and then do this full time. But that's where we are.
Yeah.
In the RPG D&D world. The other thing, this is what I forgot to write down that I wanted to talk about. You and I believe, are the only two who have written the opening adventures for the Adventures League seasons that were the short 1 hour type adventures.
That is correct. That is actually there is one other person. I believe
season 6. Season 6, I don't think they had one of those.
Oh, they didn't.
Yeah, because 1 through 5 was you, or what was me.
Mm-hmm.
Then 6, I think they skipped. 7 was you.
8 was Will Doyle. That's
8 was it? Okay,
yeah,
I couldn't
Will.
remember. All right,
so but yes, this is as far as the majority of them were definitely were you, and I kind of stepped in. And it was kind of a funny experience actually, because I remember seeing what was it, season 7 when I did the first one, and just watching the Facebook posts. It was kind of hilarious because they were like basically saying your name, and then like somebody just kind of chimes up and is like, did anybody look at the first page? Who's Rich Lescouflair?
Yeah, I was typecast there for a while. So,
yeah, you were the
people just assumed.
You were the intro adventure guy, which was great. Actually, it was kind of made me feel good because everybody kind of looked at my stuff and assumed it was your stuff. So I'm like, well, it couldn't have been bad at all because
there you go. Well, I always got, these are much better than the first 5. So there was that. But writing those adventures is very much a different experience than any other kind of adventure writing.
Yes.
Because of all the parameters that are placed on them, not just in the form of you needs to be playable in an hour, but everything that the Adventures League needs from them to introduce the season.
Yep.
So it's a great. I compare it to like writing really short stories, not quite flash fiction maybe, but very short stories that you really need to mechanically and thematically lock down to get the most out of them for the time that they're going to be played.
Yes. So because you're introducing not only the storyline that's going to carry out through everything else that comes after it, you're also in a way describing the setting and the feel of everything in that first adventure to whoever's playing it, while, like you said, keeping these adventures under an hour. It's like they basically give you a list of things that you could write an entire hardcover on, and they're like, yeah, here you go, fit this into a 4-hour adventure with 1 hour increments.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I feel like I know everything there is to know about it, and then I sit down to do it again, and for some reason, and none of the previous rules apply. It seems like I'm constantly going, oh yeah, I should have done that the first 20 times that I wrote these 1 hour adventures. I should have done that. So
well, I feel better now that I'm not the only one doing that.
Well, with that behind us, I wanted to go on to our main topic today, which is using 5e for other kinds of games. So when Wizards of the Coast released the Open Gaming License and the SRD, they gave creators the green light to create new products using that 5e rule set. So you have done extensive work, not just in creating D&D products, but you did create Esper Genesis, the 5e compatible system for playing science fiction. So I wanted to get your expertise on that process. So can you share some of the lessons that you've learned from creating a project as large as Esper Genesis within that 5e framework?
Yes, I'll start with my first. I didn't actually learn this as a lesson. I kind of tackled it head on. Is know what you're making. Like don't just kind of start from wherever. And when you're using the SRD gives you a lot of information. However, the one thing that you have to understand about fifth edition is it's the reason why it's so simplified and it flows so easily and it's so easy to play is every single aspect of the game affects another aspect of the game.
Okay.
So
cool.
you need to go through every single section of the information that you have, and whenever you're applying to it, you have to say to yourself, okay, how is this going to affect this other thing down the road?
Mm-hmm.
And that will people like to do this deconstruct thing. That was probably one of the most difficult times I had doing Esper Genesis, was to make it its own game without taking it out of the concept that is 5e. So that you can take anything else from 5e, from the player's handbook or whatever, and fit it into Esper Genesis. It's completely slot incompatible, but it's still not exactly the same game. And that's because I didn't do where like you take a rule, you break it down and you build your own thing, and now that doesn't translate to the original 5e game.
Gotcha.
That was I'm kind of glad we went that route, because it keeps the game balanced.
Mm-hmm.
And you are able to recognize things from the get-go. Even the Starship rules that we came up with, it's its own rule system, but it's based off of like the consensus that this is how 5th edition combat runs. This is how combat's going to run on a ship. So that way, again, another unintended consequence of doing it that way was we were able to do things like, hey, let's run a ship combat and ground combat at the same time.
Oh, wow.
In the same initiative, and it works.
Nice. So ship combat, like in some games, there's the rule system, like you say, for combat, hand to hand, that sort of thing. Then there's a completely different, completely nothing like the other system for space combat. So you're saying you can kind of run a space combat in Esper Genesis using the same sort of roll a d20, add a modifier, compare it to a number, that sort of thing?
Yes. Okay, so the way ship combat works is ship combat works in rounds the same way that ground combat works.
Okay.
On the ship, however, the ship is almost like a character in itself. The crew is provides the modifiers for the ship and the ship's actions. So what happens on a turn in initiative is the entire crew will say, okay, what maneuvers are you doing? Because their maneuvers affect each other. So the crew acts with their maneuvers in sequence on that turn.
Okay.
And then after that turn's over, you go to the next turn, just like any other combat. So so that way, while you have ships each taking their turns in the initiative order, you can have a ground combat taking place on just on different turns in the same initiative. So let's say a ship gets boarded, and someone has to go and leave their station. That combat happens on that character's initiative, but the ship still has its own initiative with the rest of the crew acting.
Gotcha. Okay, so I love that. So somebody at the helm who is doing their thing to power the ship or make the ship's actions in a round go, they have to step away from that role almost if they are going to involve themselves in hand-to-hand combat from a boarding crew.
Correct.
Boarding party. Okay, cool.
But then the rest of the crew that are still there in their stations, they can still perform their maneuvers on the ship's turn.
Gotcha. All right. And is the ship manageable? When you created the rules for that, did you envision, okay, we're going to have a party usually of 4 to 6 players, so that's how many roles that will be on the ship to maneuver it and have it engage in ship-to-ship combat?
When I did the initial when I did the initial concept for it, yeah, I did it for a crew of 4 to 5. I made sure that that the way that the ship combat works, that everyone has something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have, like a couple of extra characters, there are optional roles that you could put in so that everybody has something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted it to work in the fact that because the ship itself is working in one turn and everybody has maneuvers, it's different in ground combat in the sense that everyone has to discuss and sort of agree, kind of like the way a starship works, right? The crew each have their tasks.
Right.
They all affect each other, but they're working together as a team. I think it actually creates a lot of camaraderie because you have to, what the other person's capable of. And, but at the same time, there's also hey, what about, the X-Wing guys, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, because so in my mind, I'm going back and forth from Star Trek to Star Wars, right? The Star Trek is we need someone at weapons and someone at con and someone, the captain and shields. But then you jump to Star Wars and it's, you've got the X-Wing and the TIE fighter and it's just one person.
It's just one person, yeah.
Maybe a droid, running things.
Yeah,
but it's the pilot who's doing everything.
There are two different, there's multi-crew, and then that there is a single person ship combat where just the one person actually fills a role and a sub role,
Okay.
at the same time.
Gotcha. So for a larger ship where there are different roles, are those based on like skill checks or ability checks?
Well, the roles do two different things.
Okay.
So there are 3 primary roles. There's a helm or a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a technician, and then there are gunners.
Okay.
And then you have the way that whoever is in those roles. There's sometimes if there's a big crew, there are primary and secondary versions of those roles,
Mm-hmm.
and those characters affect the ship's stats. So the ship has like a base stat block.
Okay.
And whoever's in the pilot, chair, their dex for example, increases the ship's maneuverability because obviously they're more dexterous. They're a better pilot. The technician, if they have a higher intelligence or a higher wisdom, then they affect the ship's shields, which also affects their hull points and their structural integrity. That's the premise of building the stat block. And then each of those roles have maneuvers that they can perform. The pilot can perform attack run maneuvers. The technician can do things like repair the ship or use sensors, and the gunners, so they shoot them up and destroy things.
Sure. Okay. And so when you envision an adventure set in this realm, do you try to strike that balance between, in normal D&D, you're trying to strike a balance between exploration, combat, and role playing. Do you try to strike that balance in Esper Genesis, but you have 2 types of combat? You have ship combat and sort of hand-to-hand personal combat.
Yes, a lot of our adventures, ship combat, because it's a fairly new system. What we try and do is we don't have it in every single adventure necessarily.
Okay.
Actions on the ground and characters and individuality and kind of like the way that the characters interact with the world is still the primary way of playing Esper Genesis, the same as it is in D&D.
Mm-hmm.
But adding ship combat in is just kind of like adding an extra. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to term it actually. It's just something that can be put in. It's not absolutely necessary, but
it's the frosting on the cupcake.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. So, any other lessons creating a 5e non-fantasy game that has come up?
Yes. Aside from the rules and compatibility, there is the size of it all. it takes a lot of work when you're putting together like a full-sized rule book.
Mhm.
For that, you need now we're going into things you and I have talked about a lot of times. You need a person to do layout.
Mhm.
You need a person to do editing, because no matter how much you use out of the SRD, especially if you're making a non-fantasy game, you're going to need editing. You're going to need a
Yeah.
lot of editing. Because there's a lot of terminology that has to change. There are a lot of different concepts that have to change.
Mhm.
You kind of want to go through it step by step and make sure that all of your terminology being another thing. You want to make sure that all of your terminology is not only accurate, but it's consistent.
Right.
You don't want to call something one thing and then call it another thing
Right.
down the road. It'll just confuse everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, for all of these things, you are going to need, if you can't do it all yourself, which most people can't, I know I can't, you do need at least to understand the costs of doing this kind of work, which is why a lot of people use Kickstarter nowadays. It's a lot of money to produce a book, especially when you're commissioning art. Art costs a lot of money.
At least as much as the writing.
At least as much as the writing, exactly. Yeah. And then you got to figure out what you want your world to look like, right? You're still writing a setting, even though you're using sort of a skeleton of a rule system that's given to you. You're still putting together something. You need to know what everything is going to look like, and that also needs to be consistent. It can't be all over the place.
Right. So you sort of need an art director to help visualize for your artists what everything should look like.
Yep. Because even though the game is based on imagination, the books still send you that message, that feel of what the world is supposed to be like. Your imagining of it. That's how you extend it to other people.
Mm-hmm. Were there any hurdles that were particularly tough to get over because you had to use, or because you had chosen to use 5e as the basis for the game?
Yes, quite a few. I love D&D. So that's why 5e was the way to go for me.
Mm-hmm.
But 5e is the SRD, the rules in the SRD, they're built for a fantasy game. Fantasy and sci-fi are way on they're very similar, but conceptually they're way on the other side of the spectrum. So things like magic and which is just infectious in D&D, you kind of have to find a way of to weed it out in a sense.
Okay.
Especially if it's not in your setting at all, and also make things, if you're making something like a sci-fi game or a modern game or a horror game, something along those lines, you want it to feel like that kind of game. You don't want it to feel like it's D&D, but everyone's wearing like trench coats. No, that's not that's not what we're really looking for exactly. So that was the hard part, was putting that together and taking the magic system and creating that, making that into something sci-fi or sci-fantasy. That probably took the longest amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because baked right into that 5e system is the magic system, right? And with the modified Vancian spell slots that disappear as you use them,
right?
Sort of thing, doesn't necessarily fit. Like you said, a cloak and dagger game or a horror game. So being able to either extricate that very precisely using a very sharp scalpel without hurting the rest of the game, or finding a way to massage that in a way that makes sense within that world that you're building, I think is got to be tough, but super important.
Yes, it's extremely important. Even harder than doing that is making sure that you can do that and leave room for that magic system to come back in, if you want to use it.
Right. So, when you were coming up with, races, classes, that sort of thing, did you find that easy to translate into the science fiction world?
Yeah. When I was doing classes, maybe not so much. Yeah, races. I already had like a whole concept of things that I had
A
in
whole
mind.
galaxy full.
I was just like, I have this one and that one, and I did a lot of, like I said, I did a lot of writing when I was a kid, so I had a lot of ideas to pull from.
Nice.
And I was also avid video gamer, and so like everything sci-fi, everything Star Wars and Mass Effect, Fantasy Star, like all my favorite stuff, Blade Runner. I'm like, yeah, this idea, that idea, and that idea that I had put together when I was a teenager, I'm going to put this together into a species and a storyline. So that wasn't hard at all. The classes, I had stuck to a lot of the SRD mechanics because changing those could be catastrophic
Okay.
in a sense. But at the same time, I still had to do that thing where you conceptualize the game and you say, okay, how do I take this class's mechanics and apply it to something in my game? It doesn't necessarily have to translate directly, but it needs to translate into something, and that's kind of where the balancing act had gone in, and pretty much just figuring out how they interact with each other, because that's also important. The way the character classes handle each other in a group,
Right.
and how they balance out a party.
Yeah. So nobody's stepping on anyone's toes with their abilities.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any other tips, tricks, comments, pitfalls before we sign off for anyone out there who might be trying to create their own 5e compatible game that's not necessarily D&D?
I would say that going back to what I said before, concept is important. It's supposed to be the thing that affects every other decision that you make when you're using the 5e rules. But at the same time, 5e is a beautiful system. I have to say that it is probably close to my favorite of all versions of D&D, because of it takes everything good from all the prior versions and puts it together into something nice that flows easily. It's an easy system to use if you look at everything and at its components. It's very easy to manipulate without having to change a lot. Like it's almost like it was built to be a lot of other things than D&D. So that's my, if you're looking to make a 5e game that's not D&D and even not necessarily fantasy, you still look at the core of everything and just use it. Don't feel like you have to change this mechanic or this rule, or have to build everything from the ground up. Otherwise you might as well just build your own system.
True. And 5e went through such an extensive playtesting process, not just the mechanics of it, but sort of the marketing side of things, right? What do you like?
Yeah.
It's not, does this work? It's, does this work? And do you like it? And when you get that sort of input and feedback, you do end up with a system that speaks to the most number of players possible, which I think helps, make it a system that can be used for other things.
Yes. And if you make it so that it not only can be used for what you built it for, but it can be used for other things. One of the decisions we made to make it compatible with D&D and all the other 5e stuff is that there is already millions of people out there that like what's already out. So, you're introducing something brand new. It doesn't need to have a steep learning curve, and it already contains the things that you already know everyone likes and plays. So you just keep it that way. They can bring in whatever they want out of the thing they like already into your game.
True. I like that. It's a great point to close on. So, Rich, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you. A lot of fun as always. It's always
All
a
right.
pleasure speaking with you, sir.
And I want to thank those people who we're talking to. I want to thank our patrons. I want to thank a few of them by name. So Adrian Herman, Andrew Demps, Brantley Harris, Brett, Chris Steele, Curtis Y. Takahashi, Danielle Thomas, J. David Chrisman, JT Evans, and Jen Pixelscapes Gagney. Thank you so much for being patron of the show. And if you want to support the show, there are many ways you could help out. For just a single $1 a month, you can help us pay our hosting costs, editing costs, and so on. If you do give us that $1 a month, you get access to special content from not just Down with D&D, but also Misdirected Mark and Pandas Talking Games. For Down with D&D, I've been doing a sneak attack segment every week where I look at certain rules and just take 10 or 15 minutes to discuss them. So you could hear that if you would be a patron of the show. But if you can't help us by giving us even $1 a month, that's okay. We understand. Just say that you like the show on your social media account and give us a link. That would help us monetarily, or that helps us momentum wise by bringing in new listeners, and we appreciate that. So your social media shout outs are wonderful. Rich, speaking of social media, where can people find you and your work?
Well, I can be personally found on Twitter. I am at Skydawn1. My work general is it could be found on the DM's Guild Adept strip at the DM's Guild. And if you want to learn about Esper Genesis, just go to espergenesis.com. We give you all the information there. You can learn about the game, me, Alligator Alley Entertainment, and anything else you want to know.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, or you can go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, hey, Rich, what are we going to do now?
Well, I say we hop into a wormhole and see what happens.
That sounds like fun.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?